moving on, as you mentioned before, the Yeshiva of Volozhin that was founded by Chaim of Volozhin. Why did he create that yeshiva? What was different from that yeshiva from other learning institutions that existed at that point? And can we say that the Volozhin yeshiva is a prototype of the yeshiva world, the yeshivas that we have that exist today?
Right. By the way, the Volozhin yeshiva, like all the yeshivas in Chutz La'aretz, even though we always call them by the name of the place, they all had Hebrew names. So the Volozhin yeshiva, actually after the passing of Rabbi Chaim, was named Eitz Chaim in his memory. And by the way, the Eitz Chaim yeshiva in the old city of Yerushalayim was also named Eitz Chaim because of the Volozhin yeshiva in Volozhin. So all the Talmidim of the Gra, like Menachem Mendel Lishklov, like Chaim Volozhin, like even the son of the Gra, Avraham ben Agra, they all talk about in some of their Hakdamot what they call this the lowest generation, where they feel that I wrote an article about what I call the crisis in Torah study. In that generation, the feeling was that people were leaving Torah study, and they started writing this even before the rise of the Hasidic movement. There was a feeling that, remember, let me put this a little bit into historical perspective. You know, you have a lot of books that they write about Gedolim in the past, and they say when he was 5 years old, he started studying Mishnah. And then when he was 10 years old, he knew all the Mishnayot by heart. By the time he was 15, he knew half the Shas by heart. So you have these descriptions of child proteges who had these, talented children. And I always say when I read these biographies, I believe every one of them. Because in the 18th and 19th centuries, there was no free schooling. If you went to Cheder until the age of 13, and then after that, you were sent out to work, because if you didn't work, there was no money in the family, etc. So to take a child and for the community to put money into that child and give him an education after the age of 13, if he was not a child prodigy, they would have not put the money into them. So only when they saw the kids were talented at a young age did they put the money into this. So as I said, there weren't really a lot of people out there, getting back to our topic, who were able to give up what I would say all the material aspects of this world in order to study Torah, because that's really what it involved. When the Mishnah says, Pat b'melech tochel v'al ha'aretz tishan, and that's darka shel Torah, the way of Torah is that you have to, drink water and eat bread. Unfortunately, in many situations, that was correct. Even my own Rabbi Leib, who studied in the Mir and in Baranovich between the wars in the 20th century, which is much, much later in Lithuania, he also says that the school didn't, the Baranovich yeshiva did not have, and even the Mir did not really have a dining room. So you had to eat by families, what they called in Yiddish Essen Tag. There was a schedule, which families you would eat by, and what could you do? If there was a mistake, the family didn't know about it, you didn't get the meal that day. So, it was not easy to be a Ben Torah. They say that, again, in the 20th century, Rav Chaim Ozer Gruzhinsky, who was one of the leading rabbis in Vilna between the wars, he used to say, when I see a handicapped Jewish woman, I stand up, because I know that she's going to marry a Talmid Chacham. Because the other women wanted guys who had money. But this is the way it was. It was a Mesirut Nefesh. You really had to be determined to study Torah, and definitely in the time of Chaim Volozhin. Now, the Volozhin yeshiva was there in the mind of Chaim Volozhin, and I think in the reality too, to create a new type of Torah scholar, to make Torah something which is the young people would be interested, to attract them, to make it what we call an Ivy League school. We would call in the jargon of today, where you get the top scholars from around the country, not only the ones studying to be a rabbi, but the top scholars from around the country who really want to embrace the Torah and become knowledgeable. And then what they do with it, they do with it. When I studied Merkaz Rav Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, Rav Shapira also was of the same mindset. We study Torah Lishma. You want to study for Semicha, you want to become a teacher, you can do that in parallel. But in the yeshiva, we study Torah Lishma for its own sake. So, which of course, Rav Chaim, as you know, the whole fourth part of Nefesh Chaim, he talks about this question of Torah Lishma. The whole yeshiva was based on this idea: you study Torah for its own sake because it develops you as a human being, as a Jew, as a spiritual person. And this is the only way to connect to God and to the higher levels of life that we try to reach. So definitely the yeshiva had a very, tried to raise the bar of what was expected from yeshivot, and I think it did that successfully. When you see the building, by the way, it's not such a large building. It's not the Ponevezh Yeshiva, which can hold 1,000 Talmidim, but the idea of bringing a few hundred Talmidim together at that time was a major achievement. Very often yeshivot were just housed in synagogues, like the Chadarim were housed in synagogues. Eventually, of course, the Volozhin Yeshiva under the Netziv, they even have daily meals and a dormitory, something, of course, which develops much, much later in the end of the 19th century. What else did you ask? Because I don't remember.
I asked if the yeshiva that Rav Chaim founded was a prototype for yeshiva today, and then we can go on to as well, what was the initial curriculum of the yeshiva under Rav Chaim Volozhin?
Okay. Was it a prototype to today? I would say yes, specifically because the yeshivot is, until today, really copied the Lithuanian yeshiva. All the yeshivot in Lithuania really followed after the prototype of the Volozhin Yeshiva. The Volozhin Yeshiva was very similar. I mean, there's a whole book written about it by Shaul Stamfer, Yeshiva Halitait Bitavuta, the development of the Lithuanian Yeshiva, and he discusses their curriculum. But in general, I would say the curriculum was not very far off from what we know of a yeshiva today, where you study. Talmud is, of course, the main source of study, both in depth, be'iyun, and also to cover ground. Parshat Shavua is studied. In the literature of the She'iltot, there are things brought there which was not clear whether it was in yeshiva or not. For instance, Chaim Volozhin, he does say, let's say, to study Talmud together with the Rosh, which means to study Talmud with its halachic application. That's what he means by studying it with the Rosh. We also find another place where it says to study with the Ran, but that's the same idea, right? Two giants who summarized, I would say, the application of the Talmud halachically. So this idea of Torah lahalacha, studying Torah in order to apply to the halacha, or understanding the process, was very important for Rav Chaim. We also find that the students of the Gra and Rav Chaim himself, also they say to study the Shulchan Aruch with the Be'ur HaGra, the commentary of the Vilna Gaon, because it brings the sources. Because Rav Chaim thought it was wrong to study halacha without its sources. The whole idea of a scholar is that you want to understand the sources. You want to understand the connection. So the halacha is to remind you of the process and not instead of the process. Rav Chaim is quoted of saying that people say that studying halacha is like eating the fish without the spices, and I say it's like eating the spices without the fish. So, because the real thing is to understand the sources, and the halacha is just to basically summarize it for you to understand where you arrived to. So yes, it was definitely the prototype. There were some changes in the prototype. As you know, the Musar movement of Israel Salant, they added more of what we call ethical works in the syllabus of the yeshiva. There was probably some study of ethical works in the Volozhin yeshiva, but it was very, very minute within the curriculum of the yeshiva. Rav Chaim does write also in his Shiltot, I have it in my book, he says that a person should have a basic understanding of the Zohar, and he actually says to study the book Sha'arei Orah by Joseph Chikatila as an introduction in order to have a basic understanding of the Zohar. But in general, Kabbalah was something which was taught to individuals. In the Volozhin Yeshiva, it wasn't an official part of the curriculum, but we know there were individuals who came to study this, even Rabbi Eliyahu Rogler, who came to the yeshiva to study these things with Chaim of Volozhin. But the curriculum was a Talmud curriculum, and he mentioned studying Tanakh with Mitzudat Tzion, so probably that might have been part of the curriculum too, and definitely Parashat Shavua and some Musar, I would say.
And these were topics that Rav Chaim Volozhin himself taught. And we talk about Chumash, not Zohar, not Kabbalah, but he was a Magid Shir in the yeshiva.
I'm assuming, but you're asking me difficult questions. This actually has to be studied much more closely. I assume so. In general, the Rosh Yeshiva is slightly different than a Magid Shiur, and I assume there were for sure other Rabbanim in the yeshiva. And so I assume that Reb Chaim played a central role, probably at his younger age more than his later years. But he was definitely there because the Shilton literature that we have were all written in the last years of his life. Questions that people asked him, which means that he was approachable.